Introduction to the Pentateuch. The first 5 books of the Bible make up a group which was known to the Jews as the Law. And for many centuries, all 5 of the books were attributed to Moses as the sole or principal author. However, modern study of the texts has revealed a variety of styles, a lack of sequence, and such repetitions and variations in narrative that it is impossible to ascribe the whole group to a single author. 4 distinct literary traditions can be identified and found side by side in the Pentateuch. 2 of these go back to the time when Israel became a nation, a period dominated by the figure of Moses. The traditions of earlier times converging on him and the memories of what happened under the leadership together made up the national epic. One means of distinguishing between these 2 separate strands is their use of different names for God. One employs the name Yahweh and is known as the Yahwist. The other uses Elohim and is known as the Elohist. The 2 other identifiable written traditions are later. One known as the Deuteronomic, introducing additions and revisions by Levites after the fall of the kingdom of Israel. And one, the work of editors after the exile, known as the priestly tradition. The Mosaic religion set its enduring seal on the faith and practice of the nation, and the Mosaic law remained its standard. The modifications required by changing conditions over some 7 centuries were presented as interpretations of the mind of Moses and invested themselves with his authority. Genesis sets the history of the ancestors in a background of primordial history. The early chapters visualize the situation of all mankind in the persons of Adam and Eve, and see the origins of human history in an increasing wickedness, which brings the flood as its punishment. The repopulation of the earth starts with Noah, but our attention is directed ultimately to Abraham, father of the chosen people, to whose descendants the Holy Land was promised. Chapters 15 to 50 deal with the history of the patriarchs. The 3 books which follow have for their common framework the life of Moses. Exodus tells of the deliverance from Egyptian slavery and the covenant of Sinai. The journey through the wilderness connects the 2. There is added a list of ordinances controlling the practice of worship in desert conditions. Leviticus is taken up almost entirely with legislation for the ritual of Israelite religion. It can be largely attributed to the priestly tradition. Numbers resumes the account of the desert journey and the first settlement of Israelite tribes in Transjordania. Within the narrative material, there are groups of enactments supplementing the Sinaitic Code or anticipating the time when the people will have settled in Canaan. Deuteronomy is a code of civil and religious laws set in the 3 discourses of Moses. It ends with the account of the death of Moses and the appointment of Joshua as his successor. The history of Israel is the story of God's intervention and God's promises, and the obligation of his people to keep his law. At the same time, the Pentateuch gives a faithful picture of the origin and migrations of Israel's ancestors and their moral and religious way of life, seen through the treasured memories of character and anecdote. We may put Abraham's stay in Canaan at about 1850 BC, but from Exodus onwards, after the birth of Moses, we are dealing with a much later period. The likeliest time for the Exodus is the reign of Meneptah, 1224 to 1214, and from this point, the history begins to be much more circumstantial. The original 10 commandments of Moses, of which there are 2 distinct traditions in the Pentateuch, are certainly ancient. The rest of the large code of legislation found in the 5 books includes other elements of the greatest antiquity. For example, the food laws in Leviticus 11. But also laws from the later times of the judges and of the monarchy, and others again which show the development in social and religious customs, which is traceable to the exile. Throughout, The hands of the Deuteronomic and priestly editors are often to be observed, annotating and adapting.